All right, welcome everyone to Discovering the Eye. This is a new step and a new way of trying to get some messages out there from a lot of people that I've known in my life that have some experience in meditation, in enlightenment, in searching for meaning and purpose in this world. And so we're going to do some interviews in a series that I hope you find engaging. Right now, one of my guests, Joel Reynolds, author of the book Indra Yaga, and I had to work on pronouncing that. And a meditation teacher. So, Joel, how are
Yeah,
you doing today?
excellent. I've been anticipating this for a couple of days now.
Excellent. I'm glad.
Yeah, I didn't expect the book to come forth so quickly.
That's
Um,
excellent.
yeah, about 2 weeks before the end of the year, I just all of a sudden got inspired to get back into it, and I hadn't messed with it for about 6 months because
Mm-hmm.
I thought that I hadn't put a lot into it, and it was going to be a monumental task.
Yeah.
And I just said, you know what, I got to get this done. Something's telling me that this has to get out there.
Yeah.
And I sat down and I started editing, and all of a sudden, like 8 hours later, I was almost done. And it felt
That's
like
a
I
good
did,
feeling.
yeah, it felt like I did months worth of work in one day. And then it
Yeah.
just kept going. And then, yeah, on the 31st, it was published, December 31st.
So,
And
what inspired you to do the whole book?
oh, long journey. he, I had written a book called Becoming Dislabeled. Uh,
Yeah.
that was more of an autobiography. It was almost the way that my mind was trying to work out how I got to the point that I was at. So I went from in 2019, I went from a near suicidal depression, got diagnosed with ADHD, and that completely changed my life. Knowing that I had a neurodivergent brain, and that was
Right.
the reason why I was having these issues and the depressions and all that. It gave me something to focus on. Um,
Gotcha.
the way that my brain was developed became very interesting. And little did I know that that is the path of introspection.
Yeah.
It's like is watching your behaviors, analyzing your behaviors. And what I was doing was writing them down. Anytime
Yeah.
that I would get triggered by something, I would write it down and then think about it later. And at the end of that book, I developed a method called the archetype meditation, developed off of some of the learnings of Carl Jung. He has the 12 archetypes, the hero, the lover,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
they have their shadows. Well, those are all part of our collective conscious.
Right.
It's how our subconscious reacts to certain types of symbolism. And most of us call that anxiety. When we
Mm-hmm.
have to deal with somebody else, we have these thoughts of how the situation is going to go, and it creates an anxiety. So what I
Right.
would do is I would write down those the what would give me anxiety, and I would bring it into this. I built this meditation cave underneath my stairs, like Harry Potter-esque in a way.
Okay.
And I learned that by intentionally closing my eyes, relaxing, and then going and replaying these things, that I could desensitize myself to the anxiety. And that was enormous for my growth. And I became almost addicted to it, spending hours and hours a day just doing shadow work. It was just, I couldn't believe that this mechanism is inside of us.
Right.
Well, after the book was done, I have a friend who was his name is Corin Nemec. He was Parker Lewis Can't Lose back in the 90s. It was a TV series. And he read it and he said, if you can make a book on the last part of this book, you have no idea how many people in the acting community that it will help. He's like, there'll be no more Heath Ledgers, people who go into a method acting and then can't pull themselves out. He's
Right.
like, if you can write something, I can get it out to the right people, acting coaches. So I kind of have him for the inspiration
Yeah.
behind Indra Yaga.
Yeah.
Indra Yaga itself is the so Indra is the one of the Rig Veda gods from
Yeah.
Hinduism. He's the guy that has all the eyes all over him.
Right.
Indriya are the senses. He's pulling the senses into every open eye, more or less. And yaga is devotion or worship. So as we're pulling in senses, we're worshiping them. We're devoting ourselves to just the sense, not what they mean.
Right.
And that was kind of the path, that's I learned through my senses how to meditate.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
amazing. It's actually very strange. I had very much the same similar breakthrough. Um, I sort of spiraled out of control. I went to my doctors and from like 2017 or so till 2020, like saying my brain is broken. I don't know what's wrong. I
Hmm.
don't know anything. My brain is broken. That's what it feels like. It just feel I can't focus. I can't do anything. And it came on suddenly. I had childhood ADHD, but my mother was an occupational therapist. I had learned tons of techniques. She was very much against using any form of drugs or anything like that. And so I had all these techniques, but none of them seemed to be working now. I got just hit with this like horrible, horrible, crippling thing. And in 2022, I had lost my business. I had lost a job. I had lost my housing. We moved in with my mother. My mother had gotten my mother's physical health was deteriorating with cervical dystonia. My wife's mental health was deteriorating with a diagnosis of bipolar that happened during COVID. And I'm working a job doing delivery, and I just have a near nervous breakdown. I almost crash into somebody while driving, and they, instead of just like driving around me, cursing me out and driving away, they stand there and they start they park in front, blocking my car and start berating me. And I'm crying and I'm yelling and I'm like, please just move, please just go. And I just had this wave of anger and violence and wrath and wanting to hurt them. And I'd never had that before, and it scared the hell out of me. And finally, I just decided to jump the curb. I made my way home. And that night, February 19th, I went outside in the freezing cold and I sat down on a chair on the back of my porch. And I was like, I'm either going to die or I'm going to figure this out. And I had this moment. I'd known meditation. I tried meditation. I never really had gotten any use. Like, I never really fully understood what it was to be present. And in that moment, like everything had just melted away. I don't know how long I was outside. Um, it was at least a couple of hours, and I was a little bit frostbitten when I got back in. But
Ouch.
everything fell away. Everything fell away, and there was just nothing and everything, and there was no me. And I understood in like that moment that this whole thing wasn't what I was making it out to be, and that it was just these thoughts and ideas and how I was responding to them that was making the pain. The problems were, and the problems have still been there. My wife developed cancer last year,
Sorry.
and all that stuff, but we've been able to. I've not had that stress or that worry or that fear at all ever since that experience. And then I started diving in to try to really experience it, understand it, experience what happened, and that's how this whole channel, Discovering the Eye, came to be.
Oh, wow. Wow. And that's I called that I had a similar situation because you know how we can get triggered sometimes, and especially with a text message, and you let it
Right.
mull for a while and you're just like, why would they say that? Why would they say that? And then
Mhm.
eventually it just gets to the breaking point and you just unleash a freaking 5 paragraph long rant. And
Yeah.
that's something that I experienced. So the first time I actually experienced that, what you were experiencing, the I call it the limbic switch. It's the
Right.
Jekyll and Hyde. It's understanding that we have two sides of ourselves, and when we're emotional, we're not our rational self. So, and most of us can't see that or can't witness that. So when if I would have sent a text, I would have had to. I saw that I would have had to live up to that text message, to what I said, to what I believed in. So instead of sending it, I pulled my truck over, put my hands on the steering wheel, and said, there's something to this meditation. I got to figure this out. And like you said, even if I got to sit here all night, I'm going to sit here until something happens. And I remember it took about 18 minutes, and that thought loop, it was strong. Why would she say that? Why would she say that? What am I going to say back? How dare she? After 20 years of marriage, over and over. And it kept getting quieter and quieter and quieter and quieter until I don't remember the moment that it disappeared, because you know that feeling you get when you fall asleep at the steering wheel? You get
Yeah.
that road hypnosis and you're like, you jolt awake.
Yeah.
That's what happened. That was that limbic switch. And when I jolted, immediately I went down and looked at my phone and I reread the message and I was like, who am I when I'm angry? That is not my logic. I would never say that. Like
Right.
how, and it floored me, and it made me doubt everything that I've ever said to anybody when I was angry.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I dug deep into that.
Yeah. It's what you have to do. It's like when you start to strip away all the stuff and you start to realize just how much has just been like instinct and how much has just been this story that you've created around this idea of, this is Clarence Oliver, this is Joe Reynolds, and it's all the story that you've just
Mhm.
invented around yourself to explain your existence to the world. And then you realize that none of that is actually real.
Yep.
It's a process, it's a thought, it's one layer after another of thought that just continues to form and form until you're sort of so embedded in it that you can't tell the thought from the reality.
Yes. Yeah. Because we have two, we our subconscious responds to our environment. So
All right.
something happens, we feel a subconscious response. Then our mind, our ego reacts, but it reacts not off of what happened. It reacts off of the meaning we created last time. So
Right.
we're living life strictly off the meanings that we've made in the past, and we get identified as the meaning
Yeah.
instead of identifying of what actually happened.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was one of the things in your book. How thoughts become physical.
Hmm.
That was a really interesting thing. And would you like to expand on that whole thing? How thoughts
Yeah,
become physical?
that one I dug deep. That was a big rabbit hole for me,
Yeah.
and it was I knew that somehow thoughts created or held attention in your body, and
Yeah.
yoga is all about relaxing and trying to seek out the different tensions in your body and then placing awareness on them, and then they fade out. Well, we don't, we're not taught that mechanism. So what happens, best analogy that I have would be, those singing bowls,
Yeah.
you hit them and then the more
Yeah.
that's what a thought does. So it's
Hmm.
a vibration, you know, um, a lot of times thoughts are created by a sensation or a feeling. So it's brought up out of our subconscious. Our mind attaches to it, tries editing it. And then the more it looks at it, the more we place awareness on the thought, the more it resonates. Well, the more it resonates, the more it's conditioning our nervous system for what we're thinking for. So our nervous system is ready to go. Well, the nervous system is also attached to all your muscles and all the fine twitch, and now your muscles are now holding that tension.
Hmm.
And we don't even realize it. We don't feel it because
Right.
it's really difficult to sense when you're thinking. So you can't sense what's going on in your body. You can once you get a certain level of awareness, but the average person, they're not going to be able to feel the tensions if they're thinking.
Hmm.
So I had to figure out, okay, that makes sense. How does it become chronic? Because if it's not satisfied, it's still a program. We've Now we're thinking about something else, but our subconscious is programmed. We just programmed our subconscious that we're going to fight.
Yeah.
Even if we're not angry anymore, the tensions are still holding in us.
Right.
The more traumatic, the more tension gets held. We just
Yeah.
consider it as back pain, neck pain, or something like
Yeah.
that.
Well, yeah, it's like when people get massages and they'll start breaking down crying because
Yes.
they've
And they have
never
no
relaxed
idea
before.
why.
Right. They have no idea. It's just like, or I used to be a
Breathing.
hypnotist, just doing hypnosis on people where they'll start to itch, scratch, everything, like their body reacts as it's trying to loosen up and relax because they've had no understanding of how tense and how tight they've kept every solitary thing together.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And that really opened up for me with the archetype meditation I was talking about. So I'd go
Yeah.
into it if I wanted to have a confrontation. So I would go to the meditation cave and I would work out the the, the confrontation, multiple different ways that it could go. I played multiple different roles, the healing, the hero, the villain, the orphan, all the different. And I would notice after a while that each one of these would create a certain sensation. My body would react in a certain way. And
Yeah.
that's where I got that. your thoughts create tensions, create sensation. You can create feeling with your mind that
Right.
you don't normally feel, you're not aware of.
Yeah, and people are very much unaware. I know for me, that was one of the major things toward like all my discomfort in my stomach, my indigestion, all of that.
Mm,
It clears up once you start to be able
yep,
to just calm yourself down, to be able to almost like move yourself away from the thoughts and the way in which you allow them to materialize. Experience it without attachment. That's
hmm,
largely, and that's what all of meditation is. It's the process of experiencing life without attaching yourself to it, and at
bingo.
least for my my whole structure of it.
It is. And at
Yeah.
the very base level, that's what it is being able to experience your subconscious reaction without attaching a meaning to it. And the
Yeah,
things that you've attached meanings to in the past, bring them into meditation and remove that meaning from it. But what you're saying
exactly.
about the gut having digestive issues and things like that, that's also part of the chronic tension of thoughts.
Right.
That's how they become physicals, because that your brain, your heart, and your stomach are all connected through the vagus nerve.
Yep.
And if when everything is happy and stress free, there's that homeostasis. But the minute
Hmm.
that you start having stressful thoughts or you have a combative personality in front of you, or you're just those thought loops that I was talking about,
Right.
it triggers the sympathetic nervous system and causes I think it's called via dysbiosis, gut
Yeah.
dysbiosis. I think that's what
I'm
it
not
was.
sure, but it
Yeah,
sounds right.
right. Well, it's the fight or flight.
Right.
Your digestive process slows down. You get
Hmm.
bloated. You have problems in the bathroom. And by acknowledging the feelings in the stomach, by pulling yourself back in, you automatically switch into the parasympathetic. So
Yeah.
you start healing, you start resting, your digestive process starts picking up again.
Exactly.
And I kind of see this is why a lot of people have, weight problems, is they don't eat much. And they're like, how am I gaining weight? How am I not losing weight? Well, that alone, asking that question, what's wrong with me, is going to
Hmm.
keep your metabolism from properly digesting your food.
And I'd add on to that, our massive ultra processed food, like even how we treat ourselves. We don't realize just how much. Well, what I started recognizing as I started to really focus in was just how much if I ate these ultra processed foods, my brain would be hyperactive. My thoughts would be a lot more crazy. My thoughts would come
Mm.
up more, and I wouldn't even recognize my thoughts until all of a sudden, holy crap, I'm depressed. But I didn't even think about negative thought, or like the thoughts weren't obvious.
Mm.
Whereas if I'm eating healthy, if I'm taking care of myself, my thoughts are a lot more controlled, a lot louder in my mind, so they're more obvious. And so if something negative comes into my head, I'm able to just focus, to let it pass. But when you don't even like recognize it, when your thoughts are going a mile a minute, it takes one little thought to just latch on, and all of a sudden you're thrown into that depression, you're thrown into that anxiety, you're thrown into those emotional upheavals.
Yeah.
And yeah, we've deregulated ourselves from like everything in society.
Hmm. And in the beginning of Indra Yoga, I talk about sensory perceptual alterations. That
Right.
was another massive discovery for me, is that our thoughts can actually suppress our experience of the world. It can suppress our sensory system.
Right. Yeah,
And
that's what
all
I
the
really liked about your book, was that it really has a I haven't finished the whole thing yet.
Mhm.
I'm still got my goal to get it done by Sunday, but that you really attached all the physical, like the physical nature, the whole sensory physical structure to this otherwise very spiritual topic, which you don't really see very often in these books.
Yep. And that came from my passion of neuroscience.
Yeah.
The deep dive into ADHD and how my brain was formed. It
Hmm.
gave me a good understanding of all the different structures and regions of the brain and how stress or meditation can transform them.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's go on to talk about some meditation for a little bit.
Okay.
How does meditation work? Is there a right way to meditate? Is there a wrong way to meditate?
I don't I don't think there's a wrong way to meditate if you're doing it with the intention of learning how to meditate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the wrong way to meditate would be by saying, I can't meditate. My brain
Right.
is just all over the place. And I get a lot of times because I like hanging out in all the neurodivergent ADHD autism type forums.
Right.
And they're very easily triggered, by the way, because they're very attached to their hyperactive minds. So
Yeah.
when I go in there and I'm like, you need to meditate, and they're like, that's impossible. I can't meditate. There's no way. My brain is just not wired that way. I can't sit still. I'm like, good. That's what you're supposed to do. It's like listen to your body. If it can't sit still, find out where that anxiety, that itch, and
Yeah.
feed it, make it more, like bring it back out. People with ADHD are sensory seekers because
Hmm.
something happened in our environment in early childhood that told our brain to develop in a hostile environment.
Yeah.
So as in childhood, if we're brought up, if our brain starts developing that way, it goes more into um, developing like the occipital lobe, the things that pull in sensory experience. So now we're processing 125%, 25% more sensory experience in a neurotypical brain. And that's why we're all over the place. We can't focus on anything because the sensory environment is just, it's overwhelming a lot of times and we get overstimulated.
Yeah.
So of course, that became my pathway because it was the easiest and most accessible for me. I'm already a sensory seeker.
Right.
So just find out. All right. The first one was like I clapped my hands and then I felt the vibrations in my fingers.
Yeah.
And the echo would stay there as long as I focused on my fingertips. And then I had a meditation instructor tell me, he's like, now shift it to your feet. He's like, now your feet are vibrating, right? I was like, yeah. He's like, now have your hands and your feet vibrate and see if you can pull the vibration to your elbow and up to your knee. And I was like, I can. He's like, now your practice is to try to bring it to your heart. And I did. It took me a couple months and I got the vibration to come to my heart. But once it hits here, the pulse, every pulse of your heart will send out vibrations through your whole nervous system. And
Right.
that was magic to me. It was eye-opening.
Yeah. You start realizing that everything's always go like there's a focus to be had in the body, a focus to be had through the whole world through just your own body, and that
Mm-hmm.
you're oftentimes just ignoring even that to try and be stimulated by everything outside of it,
Mm-hmm.
when everything you need can be right there. Even that stimulation that you need can be used in the relaxation.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
yeah.
It's in a way it's tantra,
Yeah.
like the Vijnana Vaidava.
Right.
It's a book of 112 practices, basically. They call them
Hmm.
sutras. My let's see. Once I learned how to meditate, I didn't know that I was doing it correctly. I knew that I was doing it, but I didn't think I could teach it to anybody. So
Right.
I needed an instructor. I needed a method. And
Hmm.
online, there's this course called the Radiant Sutras. And at the time during COVID, it was the only one that was certified by the Yoga Alliance. You can get your 200 hours of certification, whatever. And
Hmm.
Lauren Roach and his wife, Camille Maureen, changed everything for me because they put what I was experiencing into words.
Yeah.
And they were the ones that told me I can't remember exactly what they said, but it was the basically that the senses are the seeds of consciousness.
Yeah.
So our senses create our consciousness. And then later on, I learned that our consciousness creates out who we think we are. So
Right.
if we had no sensory experience to build consciousness, we wouldn't exist. That's why we don't exist in deep sleep.
Right. Yeah. I well, that's for me. My instructor, my person that I've utilized or listened to a lot was Angelo DeLulu. He has a YouTube channel called Simply Always Awake.
Mhm.
Um, I'm oftentimes just finding myself narrowing in on what is a thought, what is not a thought, and that's become the go-to thing. I'll sit there and I'll meditate on what is not a thought and allow every solitary light. And when you start to strip away all of that, and you start to realize that everything becomes a process, even the very essence of the touch, the sensory you can't experience that without it being processed in your mind and then you thinking about it, without you having a thought about it. Because if when you're running through the woods, you can cut yourself up, and if you're focused on something else, not notice at all until
Yep.
you stop and start to realize, and then your brain forms a thought and goes, oh, that's pain, that hurts. And only once your brain says that's pain and that hurts and starts to define it, is that actually a reality for you.
Yep.
And
Yep. Your identifier sees it and says, hold on, that's what
right,
that pain was from a scratch that I got. That's not good.
right.
That's not
And
good.
when you start to realize that, you start stripping away, and there's this nothing, and yet there's this everything that lies beneath all of this construct that you built around all of it. Um,
Yep.
A quote just had popped up on my Facebook from Alan Watts that said, "You want to consciously become nothing and feel everything."
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was like a very true structure to what happens when you really allow yourself to meditate and let yourself be what you're experiencing.
Yeah. Alan Watts is he's like, yeah, he's he's somebody that I've listened to almost every day for the past 4 years.
Yeah,
And I can't get enough of his philosophy, because it's
yeah,
just, it's interesting because you can listen to the same thing over and over and over, and then you stop listening to it for a while, and you change gears a little bit, and then you come back to it a month later, you listen to the same thing and it means something different.
right,
And when I experienced that, that's when I started like, oh, hold on a minute, there's different levels of understanding to spirituality that you can't get to until you've experienced it, until you
right,
felt it. And that's when I started, delving a little bit into the Bible. Before all of this, I was an atheist all the way up until I was 45 years old. I was the guy that just wanted to disprove and argue.
right,
I was kind of a jerk about it. And um, going back into the Bible with this new spiritual understanding and this knowledge,
yeah,
it, completely different book. I
right,
actually saw the practices,
yeah,
and all the different parables and the Sermon on the Mount, and he was giving us these meditations, and most
right,
people don't understand that they are meditations.
right. Yogananda, I'm gonna mispronounce his
That's
name,
a
but
hard one.
yeah, the man who wrote the autobiography of a yogi. There we go.
Yep.
We'll just go with that.
Yep.
Um,
Yogananda.
yeah, Yogananda. He wrote two whole books: the Yoga of Christ,
Hmm.
and the like the entire, and then an entire book on going through the Gospels, like a 1700 or 1300 page book that goes through
Wow.
all the Gospels and explains like the nature of Christ through that perception, through through that conditioning. They were amazing books. I'm in the same place. I actually started off very much as a Christian when I was in my teens, and then in my 20s, I was actually moving toward to the idea of becoming a pastor and stuff like that. I read the Bible in Hebrew, in Aramaic, and in Koine Greek, which not not fun learning all that, but
No, that's a hyperfixation.
yeah,
You
I
need
mean,
that.
I dug in.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, and I then started to move away from the faith as I started learning the archaeology, the mythology, the structures that existed in all of those cultures, and everything like that. And I formed myself more into the atheism. And as I started to have these experiences, I started realizing, I had become very obsessed learning all these religions. I read the Upanishads. I read the whole Big Veda, which has the Upanishads in it. But
Hmm.
I read Mahabharata. I read the Tao. I've read, I go on and
Kabbalion.
on. But yeah,
Have you read the
I
Kabbalion?
I have not actually. No, that I have not.
Okay. That's a
Um,
good one.
yeah, I got to get
Because it's simple.
right.
It's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I got to
And
get to a bunch of
I'm with
stuff.
the Tao.
And
I
I've
love
read,
the Tao.
the Quran and everything. But when you start to read these things, what I noticed immediately, and I noticed very interestingly, Christ wanders off into the Judean desert for 40 days and 40 nights. That's when he begins his ministry. Mohammed goes off into the caves, and he comes back with the message of Tawhid, which is God is one. Buddha obviously goes off and sits under a Bodhi tree for 18 hours after 6 years, living as an ascetic, being nothing more than skin and bones. He has his first like real meal, sits down and realizes there has to be a better way than the full destruction of the self. And if you start to go through, and the whole of Hinduism is created by people who, by the rishis, which were considered to be people who were meditating at such deep levels that they could feel the very vibration and sound of the world. That's the entire mythology around how these texts came to be. And when you start to realize that this structure of oneness is an absolute, actual stated fact, like it doesn't matter your culture, your wealth, your religious orientation. If you get either through psychedelics, which is how we test it in the lab, or through professional meditate, through the very like high level meditators who can bring themselves to that state under lab conditions, there is a universal state that we know of in which a person experiences oneness with all things, loses their sense of self. And when you start to realize that that really comes off like the message in which these people share, but they then start to bring in their culture, they bring in their what's around them at the time, and you start to see, oh no, this might be the experience. This might be. I have no problem calling that God. Like for me, it was like there is this definitive truth that seems to be shared amongst all of these cultures and religions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And something that I talk about in the book is in the beginning is that we can only process or experience 1% of the total sensory experience of our environment.
Right.
And the sensory perceptual alteration chips away at that 1%. So in my opinion, and from my point of view, God is that 1% that we can experience.
Yeah.
We're pushing God out the more that we are involved with intellect and the mind and, like suppressing feelings and pushing away from that kind of stuff. That we're actually pushing God away when we're not accepting our
Right.
feelings and who we are.
And in a way, I would say also, have you ever heard of Roger Sperry? He did the
I don't
split
think so.
brain experiment. He did the split brain experiments. He won the Nobel Prize for learning how the hemispheres of the brain communicate with each other. In this experiment, several of the studies he did were with people that were epileptics who had
Yes.
their hemisphere split, so their brains weren't contacting each other. And so you would show a picture to one side of the brain, to the right side of the brain, and then you would show a picture to the left side of the brain. In this case here, they showed like a chicken and a snowy driveway. And then they would ask the people. Then they would show people two pictures to both sides and say which one did speaks to you the most, which one is part of that image. And their hands would cross and they'd point to both pictures. And then when asked to explain how that happened, they would say, well, obviously you have to shovel the chicken coop to deal with the thing. So you need a shovel for the chicken coop. They would show them a shovel and a chicken coop after showing them the chicken in the snowy driveway. Our brains create a story for us to rationalize why we're doing things. And so we oftentimes start to convince ourselves that we're this separate. It's very easy for us to convince ourselves we're the separate thing. And it's very scary for people to sit in that silence, to sit in that structure of self and examine that maybe that's not what they are. It seems like there's always that block that people start to come to, that worry and fear. Did you ever experience anything like that as you were starting to like strip away these things?
I didn't. I had something. Carl Jung says, beware of unearned wisdom.
Yeah.
And he's specifically talking about the people who have had these near-death experience or a mystical experience on psychedelic.
Right.
When you're in those, you're not in those. You're experiencing through the body, but your mind isn't there. Your identifier isn't there. So when the identifier finally comes back online and has to make sense of it, it can only use the conditioning that it had.
Right.
And I experienced something like that in my meditation class, just talking on my computer, just like we're doing now. And when my instructor said the senses are, the guides to our conscious, the seeds of conscious, something happened in here, and it felt like I I just exploded in ecstasy. Like
Yeah.
things just, I felt things that I've never felt before. It was in the morning. So it was like I hadn't drank anything. I was completely sober. I was ready to go, ready to go to work, whatever. And I remember turning to my wife and just saying, I feel like I just did ecstasy. And she's like, stop acting weird. And then I went right back to the class. Well, then I woke up the next morning and I started having, oh man, it felt like somebody or something was under my skin moving around like this.
Yeah.
And I've never felt that before ever. And it freaked me out. Like it felt like there was a beetle, but it wasn't a bad feeling. It was just more like a roving tension.
Yeah.
And if I focused awareness like up here, because I thought it was my third eye, and I'm like, get back up there. I thought that this tension was the third eye. So I was convinced that I had figured out the secret to the third eye. It's all, or I don't know what it was at the time. And
Right.
then I went, a buddy of mine owned a float spa, and it was, sensory deprivation.
Right.
So
Right.
it's
Right.
the opposite of the path that I wanted to go on. And the first time I went in there, the only thing that I was experiencing sensory awareness was my face, because that was the
Right.
only thing that was sticking out. And I could control it a lot better. And there was some realization that I had that said, hold on a minute, this is my sinuses. And then I looked it up and I found out that your sinuses are always in a state of flux. They're always moving. Well, how
Yeah.
can we not feel that? If they're always moving around, how do most people, how are they unconscious to it?
Right.
And that's when I realized, I'm like, oh, so an awakening is actually an awakening to your nervous system. You're feeling more of your aliveness of who you are inside than before. It's the mind body connection. The
Right.
awakening is awakening to who you are. And yeah, that started a whole nother rabbit hole. and
It's
and
always
and
one thing after another, right?
yeah, well, and that's why I explain the way that I do in Indriyaga, because it
Yeah.
was so powerful for me to know that what I'm experiencing isn't supernatural. It's not a phenomenon. I'm not special. I don't have
Right.
special powers or anything like that. I don't have I don't have anything that anybody else doesn't have. And I
Yeah.
started learning about the neuroscience behind it and asking questions like, if I put my awareness in my sinuses, can I make them contract? And the answer was yes. And
Yeah.
since then, it's selective. I can turn it off or on.
Right.
It's not a constant tension in my face anymore.
Right. Yeah. See, I think um, a lot of times for me, in these, I've been surfing around spirituality groups initially because when I started having these experiences, when I started digging in, I was like, oh, well, there has to be a bunch of people that and I'd go there and I started realizing that everyone started like it really became a process of recognizing that a lot of people start building that gatekeeping concept around it, around the idea that this is something special, that this is something unique, and this is something, oh, you have to do this special thing and this special thing and this special thing in order to, and it's like, that's not what I experienced. I'm like sitting there all the time, like that's not what I experienced at all. It just feels like it's like coming home. It's like waking up and realizing, holy crap, I've been dreaming all this time. And you look around and you realize everybody else is still dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not that you're special, it's that they're awake. They just don't realize it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, oh, my spiritual ego was born the minute that I realized that I had this awakening. And of course, it's like, I'm enlightened. I got all the answers now, and I had no answers back then.
Right.
I knew how to meditate on it, and I knew how to tell people how to recreate the feelings that I was feeling.
Right.
But yeah, it spiritual ego. That's a
It,
big
it,
one.
it, it inflates quick too. It'll come up on you like, oh, holy crap, I must know it all. I just had this
Yes.
great experience. I saw God, and you're like, and then you're like, I must speak on this, and
Yes. I need to
it
share
wipes
it
you
with
out.
all of humanity.
Yeah, it happens quick. You start to really like convince yourself that there's something special. That's what like 90% of my videos, they all end with, you are perfect and complete just the way you are, right there. You,
Mhm.
not this, not me, not anything else. Everything else, anything I can share, you already know. there's nothing I can share that you don't know. It's just that you're just not letting yourself be aware of it, or you're not accepting it. But
Hmm.
that's it. It's not. It's nothing special. It's nothing unique. My favorite quote is from Confucius, which is no, not Confucius, or maybe it was. I forgot now. But largely it went that a man becomes a man goes to work, a man wakes up, goes to work, comes home. A man becomes enlightened. He goes to work. He wakes up, goes to work, and comes home. There's no difference. Your life doesn't change. Nothing special happens. You're not all of a sudden magical or can do anything unique. It's just that you just see the game.
Hmm.
You just see you see life for what life is,
Yeah.
and you realize the beauty of that, and you get to keep living that life.
And you kind of experience it differently. Like
Right.
the
It just
uh
strikes different. It hits
yes.
differently when you real. It's like if you were watching a movie, if you were watching a documentary, and then somebody said, "Hey, that documentary is actually just a movie," and all those things you just saw, all that horror and violence and all that stuff, it's just a movie, and you're
Yep.
like, oh, it just hits differently because you're able
And
to
then what happens
step
when you
away from
watch
it.
it again? So
Right.
you watch that movie again with that realization, that meaning in place, and now you're just experiencing the meaning.
Yeah.
You're not experiencing the movie for what the movie is, and you're denying yourself that reaction or the response.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the whole other level. That was the thing that for a while my initial thing was like, oh my goodness, I can't be emotional. I can't have emotional responses.
Yeah.
I can't have, and that's not enlightened. That's not this or that. And then I started. It's all life. It's
Hmm.
life taking
Hmm.
shape. That your tears are part of that process. But
Hmm.
it's when you start to lose yourself and you go, oh, I'm crying because I am devastated and miserable and sad, and this is how my life is. That you become lost in it. But the tears are that's what your body's going to do. Your body has that reaction. Your body has these emotions in it, but it's when your emotions turn into feelings is
Hmm.
how where you start to put the thoughts to your emotions, start to try to define your emotions, give them meaning, give them all this stuff, that you start to get in trouble, that we start to really struggle with stuff.
Hmm. Energy and motion,
Yeah.
emotion, and
Yeah.
trying to stop that with meaning. That's mental illness.
Right. That's where you
Literal.
just start to get really in a bad place.
Yeah. And enlightened people, they, from what I've read and experienced, is that they actually feel more of life. They
Right.
feel the emotion, they feel the anger, but they just don't edit. They don't react. They feel the response, but they're able to just let it flow.
Well,
Just
right,
let it
because
go.
it's when it's. I remember the first time I felt like I truly experienced. I try to even cut out like the word feel, because it's like an experience of sadness. It's an
Mm,
experience of happiness. It's an experience of these like emotions. And when you start to really experience like the emotion and just let it be there, not try to define it, not try to give it a narrative, not try to do anything, just let it come and let it go. It
yep.
is it's an utterly different experience to the be experiencing sadness versus being sad is
Hmm.
an entirely different thing.
Yeah. Yeah. If you love it, let it go. And
Yeah.
everything that arises, we're supposed to love, right?
Right.
Because God is love. So anything you experience from here, we have to label it with our mind that it's love.
Yeah.
And whatever you love, you let go. That also has to do with the carry water, chop wood
Yeah.
metaphor or koan.
Yeah.
And it's after enlightenment, you do the same thing you did before, because now you're experiencing it. You've learned how to experience something again for the first time.
Right.
The truth is only in the first time we experience something, because our mind will label it. And the next time we experience the label.
Right.
So if you learn how to remove those labels and the meanings, you actually gift yourself the ability to experience something multiple times for the first time.
And it
And
becomes almost like play. It becomes almost like a play to
exactly,
it. Yeah.
it is. It is. That's the cosmic joke.
That is.
We take things too seriously. We don't play with it.
Oh, like Layla, as it's what the universal playfulness,
Hmm.
the divine playfulness of existence. You
Yep.
know, that's what it is. We take seriously what the gods made for fun.
Hmm.
You
Yep.
know.
And that's what I learned from Alan Watts.
Yeah.
Yeah, he says a lot about the Layla and the play and the Joker.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
It's
from what I've found is that enlightenment itself is is more of a deep relaxation, a
right.
conscious, deep relaxation of the nervous system. So you, because meditation, its main function is to relax the nervous system so you can experience anything. And the
Right.
more relaxed your nervous system is, the more you can feel the subtleties of life, the vibrations of the earth. So, like the rishis did.
Right.
And you can't feel that stuff if you're caught up in thought. You can't
Exactly.
think and sense.
The One of the things I noticed, even now in my meditations, less so, but still, the moment my mind, I can sit still, and I can sit still for an hour, 2 hours, um, and not move, not respond to itches and scratches or noises or anything. The moment my mind starts to drift off into thought, my body moves with it.
Hmm.
My body moves with the thoughts. Suddenly, if I've lost focus, if I or I start to engage with my mind, my body begins to engage with it, and you start to realize, oh, yeah. So then, when I start to think, oh, I'm emotional, and I used to be an emotional eater, I've dropped 100 pounds last year, during the
Wow.
whole of last year. Yeah. Um, and I just from little things like that, recognizing that, oh, when I'm hungry or something like that, and I just took an action instead of just allowing the feelings to come and go. I started building thoughts around these things, these experiences that I was having in my body. And the moment I did that, I lost control. My physical body would follow the thought versus where I was actually at in the physical body.
Hmm. So you can now feel the subtle body.
Right.
When you get a thought, even if it's a small thought, you can feel waves of sensation kind of following the
Just
thought.
moving through, right? Yeah, just moving through the whole. Yeah, it's that vibration that sort of moves with the whole thing, and you realize, oh, my thoughts are taking me this way, and thoughts are taking that way, and then you start to just let the thoughts come and go without reacting to them,
Hmm.
and let them silence, and then you're just engaging with life as it's like unfolding in front of you, and it's an amazing experience.
Hmm. Yeah, it is. It is. You see things differently.
So I
And
wanted to
go ahead.
yeah. I did want to get into what is a sadhana, and I wanted to get into how people can actually start to build their own sadhanas, and build their own practices to live that, and to start building their own way of helping themselves get into good places.
Um, Most people just need permission to be
Yeah.
vulnerable with themselves. And my book, Indriyaga, was one of the reasons why I wrote it was most people are meditating. They just don't know it.
Yeah.
There's something that you've done your entire life. Like for me, I like taking warm baths. And
Hmm.
I've been that way ever since I was a kid. And I didn't realize until a couple of years ago that that was a form of meditation. Because what do? You sit in there and you feel all the goosebumps and the hot water and the stimulation, and you just want to sit there and just experience the whole thing.
Yeah.
So a sadhana would be something that you've been doing that now you discover as a meditation and you build on that.
Yeah.
And you should have a place where you devote practice, some place that you can go every day. And like this, like my cave here,
Yeah.
when I enter here, I give myself permission to go into meditation, to feel out certain aspects of myself. And the rest is once you've developed that practice and you've got the idea of seeking out sensations in your body is a form of meditation, then you can start experimenting. You know, in this cave here, the acoustics are amazing. I've soundproofed most of the walls.
Yeah.
Got a speaker in back of the computer that's got a lot of bass in it, and the highs, treble, the mids, all that gets trapped here, but the bass is omnidirectional. So I can turn the music up really loud and play some singing bowls or like the frequency videos that you see on YouTube.
Hmm.
And that would stimulate. I wouldn't even need to use my mind. It would
Right.
stimulate the bass I could feel it in my chest. And that is a powerful meditation because you're feeling it. You can't think when you're in there. You can
Hmm.
think for a minute, but the sensation doesn't really go away. You can snap right back to it.
Yeah.
So you have to have a dedicated place in your house where you do meditate as part of the practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's, yeah, definitely good advice to have, is to, yeah, it also, you
experiment.
start to, you right, and you start to condition your, like, this is the place. So I come there and this is the moment where I take that seriously, instead of like just trying to sporadically do something on the spot and everything like that. You start to lose your balance. You start to lose um that overall focus, I would say, onto because well, our brains are always taking in. So if you get used to a singular environment, your brain doesn't have to do that much work in taking in something new, taking in everything, and it can just relax and be like, oh, this
Yep.
is our place where we sit down here and we're gonna shut off for a little minute.
Yep. Yep. The ego needs to be comfortable because that's its primary goal in life, is to identify things, threats that they can eliminate, push away from in order to live a comfortable existence. Our ego is designed to make us comfortable. So pander to it.
Yeah.
Build something that makes you very comfortable, that you can leave your cell phone out of it. You don't have to worry about the you're feeding your kids, dinner. You do it at a certain time every day, and your family knows that you're going to be meditating in here. There's nobody going to bother you. So the ego doesn't run down the to-do list, because there
Right.
is no to-do list. You're saying, shh, it's okay. It's okay. Let's play. Let's play with these sensations. Let's develop a relationship with the self.
Yeah. That's the most important thing initially, right? Is to
Mm-hmm.
first, you got to form that relationship. If you don't form that relationship, you just start yourself so far at that distance. And I think that is what we are witnessing in our world, is that we keep moving ourselves further and further away from trying to move ourselves outward instead of trying to get inward.
Yeah. I've guided quite a few people on psychedelic trips. I've sat there with them and I've helped them because Terrence McKenna, he's famous for
Yeah.
saying, you got to go. You got to go the heroic dose. You got to do the high, whatever. You got to go alone and all that kind of stuff. But what he also says is that you have to be comfortable. You have to
Right.
lay down, surround yourself with pillows or blankets or whatever, and get into a state of extreme comfort in order for the mind to say, okay, now I'm gone. Now you can experience all the magic.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what
Have you done psychedelics yourself?
yeah, life is all about experimenting. And one of the things is like, okay, now I've awakened this mind body connection. What happens? I needed to
Hmm.
know. And it gave me one hell of an analytic look at how the brain and the mind processes
Right.
sensor. It was, yeah, that was a hell of
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
experience.
It's very fun for me. It's always very fun. I had never I never drank. I still don't drink at all. I've had 6 drinks in my life, 2 of them when I got married.
Ooh,
Um,
nice.
and I never really did. I did a little cannabis when I had a tooth infection, because my mother uses cannabis for her physical problems.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I had this. I started. It got so right after I had this whole awakening thing, literally 3 days after, I was talking to a friend that I had it in when I was in grade school, and we hadn't talked at all from like when we parted ways in grade school to that moment in time. And something we were discussing drug policy or something like that. And I was like, yeah, I'm really interested in magic mushrooms. And I hear in Oregon, they're about to like make them legal, and I'm going to figure out how to get some money and get over there. And he's like, dude, you don't have to do that. I got you. And so I had gotten my first, I got my first dose, a little 1.8 grams, and I
Hmm.
tried it, and I sat there and nothing happened.
Hmm.
And then around like 2.5 hours in, I went and lit a lighter, because I had something in my hand. I had to move about. And I stared at this lighter for like 5 minutes.
Hmm.
And that was the first time I had experienced mindfulness, like pure structured mindfulness. Um, Probably in my entire life, but like while I was fully like consciously there, and I saw that whole structure of like my problems in front of me, the stories I tell behind me, and then there was just me, and there was just this. And I realized in like those moments there that how my mind was taking all these things and formulating all these things and making all these things, problems and issues and all of that stuff, and it was all just stories. It always comes back to all just being part of those stories.
Yep. Yep. One of the things that I got was that it removes the filter of this sensory perceptual alteration. So if you have suppressed senses, that's the
Yeah.
reason why it's such a vibrant experience that you're not used to, because you're seeing things that have been suppressed probably your whole life. And something that Alan Watts said is that psychedelics create almost a magnifying glass with your
Right.
senses. So instead of having 1,000 little eyes that are all over the place detecting smell, hearing, interoception, exteroception, now they're all attached to your focus. So whatever
Right.
you're focused on or whatever you're focusing your awareness on, all of those little eyes now are looking at it. And whatever we look at, it's gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And we keep cutting and then comparing and then cutting and then comparing. So that's where a lot of people get in trouble. They have bad trips because they start focusing on the sensations of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And instantly they think the thought that created the anxiety is real. Because now this anxiety is like that singing bowl. The
Right.
harder you play it, the more it resonates. And I've seen people just cripple themselves, just
Yeah.
ball up because they're scared.
Yeah.
And
Well.
sometimes all it takes is just, hey, just hum this with me. Om mani padme hum. Feel the hum, feel your vagus nerve, and then they're out and they're back
Yeah.
to normal again.
Yeah. It's they're very interesting. That's where I sort of I still probably use them a little more um than I like to admit to, but I
Mhm.
do find them just greatly helping in that way of engaging the mind and showing the mind. But one of the things that had always interested me was just that I've had what a lot of people would call like horrible trips, like hell experiences, experiences where you feel like your eyes are melting or your body's peeling away or
Mhm.
stuff like that. Um, in one trip, I lost complete sense of object permanence. I could not tell how to walk down. I have a supermarket that's right down the street from my house. It's literally straight, turn right, turn left, and it's there. I could not see that in my mind. I had that entire blackout experience of like, no, the world does not exist if I can't see it.
Mhm.
And but all those I've noticed that I've never freaked out on. I've never had, God willing, I've never freaked out on it, from all these negative experiences, largely from just the acceptance. Okay, well, I guess right now we're going to be in hell. Just sort of
Yeah,
looking around, like, I guess
you're a
we're in hell
visitor.
right now.
Woo!
We're
All
going to
right, look
visit.
at them flames.
You
Yeah,
see a bunch of
you
like
gotta go
faces
with it.
with needles in it, and it's like, oh, how you doing? Or your eyes are melting. You're like, okay, well, I guess.
Yep.
And it's a strange sensation to just be. For me, that's one of the major things that it taught me was that it was the ability to accept your entire happiness, your entire joy in life, your ability not to freak out at life is your ability to accept life. Whatever you can accept of life, you're going to you'll be fine with, and whatever you can't accept, that's where your misery, that's where your pain is. It's that inability to it's that desire. Well, as Buddhism says, it's desire. It's the desire for something to be different than what it is.
Yep. Ah, that's good.
And yeah, it's what we're running from. It's what
Yeah.
I feel like everyone's running from is that desire. We all want life to be different, and because of that, we are all constantly in a state of suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, like the first line of the book in Raga is
Yeah,
who am I?
yeah,
It's like I'm nobody because everything I thought I was dissolved through chronic suffering.
right,
So all the identities that I've had in life led to some kind of chronic suffering because an identity is a form of suffering. It's
yeah,
self-imposed and sometimes pleasurable suffering. And that's it. And what do they say? Suffering is bliss. They're the same thing.
Yeah.
It's suffering is a clenching down on our nervous system, and bliss is a letting go.
Yeah.
So understanding that mechanic. And that's another reason why I wanted to put so much neuroscience in there, so people can understand how our bodies clench down on experience.
Exactly. Yeah. That, like I said, that's what I really found interesting and engaging. That's why um, I was really excited to talk about it, because you really go into like the neuroscience. You break down the body structures, you break down the sensory structure, you break down every little piece of these things, and how this whole entire physical structure is just linked to our is linked through our minds, through this entire experience. Through yeah, you link the physical to the spiritual in a way that is very different from most books I read on the spiritual.
And that's,
Yeah.
I've had a lot of people that I've taught meditation, I've talked to, they all say the same thing, is that I've never heard it explained this way before. I've even somewhat converted many atheists, because an atheism is just like, give me proof. That
Right.
they're just waiting for proof to come down and say, oh, here's God in front of me.
Right.
So I tell them my theory, and they're like, I get that. I can get behind that. But that's not the God that did. It's not some being up in no, it's not.
Right.
No, it's all in here. There is nothing outside of the mind. That's what the Kabbalion says. It all is mind.
Right.
Nothing exists outside of our mind. So when our mind is not there, nothing. The things that exist need to be identified to be existing. So
Mm-hmm.
without the identifier, without our mind, when that drops out, all there is experience. It's just
Exactly.
the processing of our environment.
As I oftentimes point out in my videos on this channel, it's that in truth, our entire perception of the world, everything is just atoms vibrating. The
Mhm.
table, the chair, us are all just atoms vibrating at a certain frequency, and we're projecting ourselves back into the and our minds are taking these little photons that are bouncing off, going into these other structures of our atoms that have formed eyes, and then creating a story that's staying consistent. But it's like, this is a wall, this is that, and this is this, but it's all just roughly empty space moving about at this level that we are engaging with in some way, that we're not slipping through itself, we're not running through, we're not disappearing through walls or falling apart and disassembling. And when
Mhm.
you realize that none of these atoms are ever going to die, none of these atoms are ever going to die, all the energy that makes it up will always exist. There is the only thing that we ever have that's ever death or birth is consciousness.
Mhm.
That's it. It's our consciousness that'll go away. It's our consciousness that comes into existence. Everything else, everything that we are, all the atoms that make us up, will go back into the world and form again into trillions of other lives throughout all of history and time. It'll form planets. It'll form walls. It'll form everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just found, when I realized that, when I had that meditative experience, and I had sat there and I had felt every little piece of me just dissolve. And it took me a while to process. I was like, what was that? And I just had no more fear of death. I had no more anger. I realized that all my anger had come from that, like, fear of death. Like, oh, I haven't done enough with my life, and if I die now, then I die a failure, and I die this way. And I had all this anger pent up over that, like, idea. And when I was able to confront that, like, all the anger disappeared.
Yeah. Yeah. The oneness. When you experience the oneness,
Yeah.
and you experience the oneness by allowing your nervous system to rest, your mind goes away, and you can experience everything in your environment the way it was meant to be experienced. The wind
Exactly.
blowing, the cats
Without a
meowing.
filter, without
Right.
that filter, it's just
Right.
pure existence, just
Yep.
pure. This is what it is.
Yep. Yep. So one of my theories is, okay, so sensory transduction is how we pull in sensory experience, or a sensory system will convert these chemical signals that are from out here to
Mm-hmm.
electrical signals that go to the brain.
Yeah.
Once it hits the brain, that becomes consciousness.
Yeah.
What we are, this personality, this thing that I'm talking out of, is a byproduct of that sensory transduction. We're a spark of
Yeah.
consciousness. So we exist through consciousness, but not before it. So
Right.
consciousness, our senses, our environment creates, we're a reflection of our environment. That's why they say everybody's a reflection of God. You know, we're all
Yeah.
little mirrors of God, because we're constantly reflecting our environment through our sensory system. And oh shoot, I forgot where I was going with that one. I hate it when that happens. But
I'm right there with you. It's that ADHD in the brain.
oh, it is. It is. I used to call it channeling. You know, you'll
Yeah.
you'll get a really good like aha moment.
And then you flip through the channel and you're like, darn, I
Yeah,
can't
the
find that
minute the
channel
minute
back
I
here.
look at the wall, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
there's a texture on this wall that I'm not familiar with. Oh crap, I just forgot everything I was just talking about.
Yeah. There
But
was
yeah,
there was a book called A Case Against Reality by Donald Hoffman, in which
Mhm.
he has this multimodal user um, it's a structure, it's theory in which largely that we have conscious agents or one consciousness. They're bouncing around, but he's built an entire mathematical process with with physicists and other people, and he's trying to um, create he believes that the answer to that like universal theory, that universal thing that will explain everything, is in the understanding that consciousness is what is driving the universe and not the physical laws and physical structures in which we are conscious, in which we are trying to consciously measure.
Mhm.
It's a very interesting structure, largely pointing to that idea that our reality isn't what we actually perceive, that reality isn't real
Mhm.
in the way in which we think it is. And I always find it just so interesting that these are the ideas that have been put out there, 6,000 years ago, and now we have science and we have neuroscientists discovering, oh yeah, no, our brains do create a bunch of stories, and our brain creates the self, and the self isn't real, and that's what they've been saying for 3,000 years, and we've been like, oh no, obviously the self is real,
Mhm.
and now we scan our brains and we're like, oh yeah, maybe it's not. And it's just amazing how we continue to find that the people that just sat in silence and just said, let me just experience what silence is,
Yep.
got answers to our existence correct,
Mhm.
in without any of the ability or technology to even begin to harness that knowledge that we now are beginning to even come across or think about
Yeah,
as
you know, and
possible.
we can find it, we can track it, we can map it with the fMRI and the MEG.
Yeah.
You know, there was a show on Netflix where this uh master, I think his name was Mingya Rinpoche,
Yeah.
and he, you know, he had the fMRI thing on, and he was able to evoke happiness. And they said that the brain activity spiked to the point of a stroke patient. Like they've
Hmm.
never experienced somebody that can regulate their experience like that.
Right.
And when I saw that, I'm like, I need to get one. I need to get on one of those fMRIs, because I think I can play that like a video game. Be like,
Yeah.
watch this. I can activate this portion of the hemisphere of this brain by thinking logically and then creatively, and then I can create happiness. I can create anxiety, like all of these things that I've worked on removing the meanings. Now it's given me the ability to create the feelings at will, almost like I'm waving my hand around. So I can
Yeah.
create happiness. I can create anxiety if I want. It doesn't have the same
Definitely.
meaning. It's intense, but
Yeah, right, because you've mapped out the whole system, so it's there. It's all just a thought, so you can take that thought, take that structure, and just produce these emotions, copy through them.
mhm, yep.
Yeah.
And that I got that the chakra chart, chakra system was
Yeah.
all, it's like a target practice for emotional intelligence.
Right.
Is when you feel something in your solar plexus chakra, that's
Mhm.
your people sensing. You
Yeah.
know, that's usually uh, uh, if we get pulled over by a cop, you know, you have
Yeah.
that panic, or
Yeah.
you're falling down on a roller coaster, or even a thought that creates an anxiety.
Yeah.
And where on the chart are you hurting yourself? And
It's
my
like, yeah,
theory,
point.
yeah, my theory is that the crown chakra, the thousand
Yeah.
petal lotus, is so intricate because that's our thoughts, and we
Yeah.
have to master and unlabel each one of those petals in order to master that crown chakra.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, the
I,
more
yeah.
petals, the more things that are attached to it that you need to remove. You know, your root chakra is just reproduction and safety and security. There's just two little petals on that thing. That's an easy one to get over for
Yeah.
most people. Some people identify by it.
There's always, yeah, it's, everyone has their challenges. Everyone has their
Hmm.
difficulties. Well, I mean, this has been an absolute pleasure. I'm going to put the link to your book right at the bottom there in the description section. So,
Awesome.
you know, everyone who's watching this, check it out. It's an excellent read. And thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This was
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anytime.
We probably, yeah. We got to do it again. I want to do one focus like really on the ADHD, you
Hmm.
know, at some point. Yeah. All right.
And
So,
if
yeah, go ahead.
you take the book, read
Yeah.
the book
Oh, yeah.
all the way
There's the,
through, reference all kinds of stuff, kind of absorb it,
yeah.
and then you do magic mushrooms. But when you do it, completes like make yourself, like I said, make yourself as comfortable as possible. Like have down comforters and pillows and bring the temperature, the air down,
Yeah.
and go into yourself. Like cover yourself and smell all your bodily smell. Every bodily scent that you have triggers something else. And you'll
Yeah.
get to map out so many different areas of your senses that you didn't realize existed. And you learn a lot. Like you get into your base primal nature.
Sounds sounds like something I might try.
Yeah. Yeah. And knowing that these sensations and things are, you know where they're coming from because
Yeah.
I've written them down as far as the neuroscience behind them.
All
It's
right.
something, it takes a lot of the what if
Yeah.
away, the meaning, because there's a meaning. You don't need to
Yeah.
search
There
for
is. All
it.
right. Thank you again so much for your time.
Thank
This has
you.
been wonderful. Everyone, the book is Endriaga. This is Joel Reynolds, and let's have a great time. Let's everyone get his book. Get his book.
Thank you. And right now it's $1.99 on ebook.
Yeah.
And if
On
you're a member, it's
Amazon.com.
free.
Yeah.
The hardcover, I'm still having problems. They're saying that I'm misspelling the name, and I'm not misspelling the name, but the soft cover is out now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Excellent, man. Have a
All
good
right.
one. Talk to
Thank
you
you.
soon.
You too.